Hello, I'm Power, and I want to make a tier list for Dreamscaper talking about the dodges or the shoes that are available in the game. Hey, this is Power from the future. This is the tier list. If you're just here to see how I ranked these guys, here you go. But if you want to see why I ranked everything as they are, just keep watching the video and you'll get your answer. Thanks. Not all shoes are really made equal, and I wanted to make this tier list so that it could better help anyone that wants to play it and understand where some of the pitfalls and which dodges are just outright better than others. As for any tier list you find out there, these are just, my own opinion, but I've also am judging it off of the getaway potential, just how far away you can get away from whomever you're trying to dodge. And I've also made my own R&R test. R&R test being regret and resentment, because when it comes to those two bosses, there's two attacks that generally get people hit. Specifically speaking, with regret, you have the overhead swing and the shockwave that follows, and with regret, you have the two swing projectile attacks where you have to dodge both of them. The other thing I want to mention is that I'm looking at these dodges that you're playing on Nightmare more so than normal or hard. The reason being is because the bosses on Nightmare attack a little faster and the enemies on Nightmare are more plentiful and you get the more difficult varieties and sooner. So with that said, let's just get started. The first up that I want to talk about is Acrobatic Shoes. The Acrobatic Shoes are a super short range dodge, but it has the most amount of iframes in the dodge. And because it has the most iframes, you can almost be completely invincible, chaining all of the Acrobatic Shoes dodges together, where you could almost just never get hit. It does pass the R&R test. It passes regret because each dodge is really short, so you can chain them together and avoid both the swing and then another dodge for the shockwave. Same thing with resentment. The dodges are short enough where you can dodge both without any issue. However, the biggest problem, as you might already know, with Acrobatic Shoes is that it is very short. So even though you can dodge bosses really easily, when it comes to the normal floors, the enemies can eventually surround you and you barely end up having an opportunity to get away and find an opening to attack, which is the reason why I put Acrobatic Shoes in the C tier. You just can't get away enough for them to be viable. In a 1v1 or on a lower difficulty, perfect, probably A or S. But when it comes to actually trying to beat the game at its most difficult level, you just can't quite get to the bosses. So now let's talk about Astral Hop. Astral Hop is a short range dodge where you basically blink from one end to another. It's very predictable. It's also super easy to trigger perfect dodges. If you dodge through anything, you almost always get a perfect dodge just by accident. Astral Hop does fail the regret test. The distance of the dodge is almost exactly the same distance as the shockwave that ends up following the overhead swing. So you almost always will get hit by it. Now, I am saying that it does fail the regret test, but that doesn't mean that it's not impossible for you to not get hit by the shockwave. I'm just saying that in general, that attack can be dangerous if your placement is not correct. Astral Hop does, however, pass the resentment test, but only barely. I find that I have to end up mashing the dodge button just so that I can get that second dodge in for the second swing. All of this firmly puts this, in my opinion, in the B tier. I would always take Astral Hop over Acrobatic Shoes. Next, we have Burning Step. Burning Step gives you the most distance out of all of the shoes, so its getaway potential is top tier. It does pass the R&R test. Because of the distance, you only have to dodge once to get away from the shockwave and the second swing of resentments. Burning Step does have the potential of messing up your extinguish combos because it ends up burning, but it can be a starter for like water and oil-based attacks. But the biggest thing about Burning Step is that you can pass through monsters. Not only can you get far away from the monsters that you're trying to dodge from, but you can also go through them, which firmly places Burning Step in the S tier. Next, we have Featherfoot Flip. So Featherfoot is an average distance dodge. However, it has a shockwave that pops out when you hit the ground. This, unfortunately, gives you a very, very long recovery time. However, can sometimes buy you time if it hits nearby enemies. The problem with that is if the enemies get the jump on you as opposed to the other way around, they will hit you before the shockwave of the Featherfoot pops out. Featherfoot Flip does pass Regret, but it does fail in hard Resentment. With Regret, because of how slow the dodge is, you actually only have to dodge once, and you are airborne over the shockwave. But because of that same reason, because it's so slow, you cannot get a second dodge in when the second projectile comes out of Resentment. And that same reason of being so slow does have the potential of getting you surrounded by several monsters and you just can't get away. So it doesn't have very good getaway potential even though it can stagger. You'll end up getting hit as you're just desperately trying to get away, which is the big reason, and unfortunately it belongs on the bottom tier. You just can't get away, and it doesn't give you the iframes like Acrobatic Shoes does. Next, we have Lightspeed. Lightspeed is this weird dodge where you don't feel like you're going in a straight line, but once you use it for a little bit, you realize where you use it and where you end is a straight line. Lightspeed is also kind of a slow dodge, but it's not as slow as Featherfoot. So it finds itself still passing both the R&R test. It's still slow enough to get past both Regret's attacks, but it's still fast enough for you to dodge twice when it comes to Resentment. But the big thing about Lightspeed, very similar to Burning Step, you can pass through monsters again, which is why it goes into S tier. Because it passes both R&R, the getaway potential with Lightspeed is still good enough for you to find an escape route, but at the same time you can still get away from any of the bosses. Now we have Roll. Everything about Roll is just straight average. It's a super average dodge. Therefore, it deserves a super average score, which is why I'm putting this one in the C tier. Roll is short, it's predictable, Roll does fail Regret, but it does pass Resentment. Very similar to Astral Hop, Roll's distance is basically the same distance as the shockwave that comes out of the overhead swing, but it's quick enough for you to be able to dodge twice with both swings of Resentment. Next we have Shadow Step. Shadow Step has a further distance dodge compared to Astral Hop and Roll, but it has a longer recovery than Astral Hop. Shadow Step does just barely pass the R&R test. It is just barely far enough for you to get past the shockwave with one dodge, and it's also barely far enough when it comes to Resentment. However, pulling these off does require just a smidge bit of practice to be able to pull it off consistently. But because I'm saying it's passing the R&R test and the getaway potential of the far distance dodge is really good, I'm putting Shadow Step in the A tier. Not as good as Burning Step or Lightning Speed because you can't pass through enemies. The last dodge that we have is Weave. Now I know what you might be thinking, like I got two left here. We'll get to Whirling Circuit in a second, but let's talk about Weave. Weave is the super short range dodge. However, it also has the quickest recovery. It has the least amount of iframes, and at a high skill ceiling, you can chain together several perfect attacks with many different range attacks, especially Blowgun, since Blowgun has a very long recovery after shooting. Even though Weave has a very short distance when it comes to getting away from regular enemies, it's quick enough where you can actually still make some distance. When it comes to the R&R test, it does fail with Regret, however it does pass with Resentment. With Regret, the dodges are just too short, which forces you to dodge twice. However, the recovery is just a smidge too long for you to be able to pull it off. But on that same note, when it comes to Resentment, Weave is fast enough to use to dodge both attacks with Resentment. With all of that said, this is where I put Weave in the B tier. However, with a nice little asterisk, you can pull off a large amount of damage with a lot of ranged weapons, boosting your capability of defeating a lot of bosses. However, when it comes to talking about it as a dodge, it's just not super good for dodging. Now, I want to add a bonus to this tier list, and that's going to be Whirling Circuit. I can understand Whirling Circuit can be a little decisive because it's technically a melee attack and not a dodge, so it really kind of doesn't belong on this tier list. However, the alternate attack on Whirling Circuit is basically a Burning Step. In fact, I think it might even be a further distance than Burning Step. And because it is an alt attack, it also staggers enemies, keeping monsters up in the air and doing damage. You can also use the alternate attack going through monsters as well, very similar to Burning Step in Lightspeed. But because it doesn't really technically have any iframes outside of where you start and where you end, and it has a immensely long recovery time, however you can mitigate some of that by dodging out of it, I would want to firmly place Whirling Circuit in the A tier. And that's my tier list when it comes to dodges in Dreamscaper. As I've already said before, this is my own personal opinion, and I've made up my own R&R test for these dodges, so take this tier list just with a grain of salt. However, I do wholeheartedly believe that there is some merit to why these shoes belong where they do. If you disagree, comment down below and let me know what your opinions are. And if you found this helpful at all, give me a like, and thanks for watching. See you next time.